Welcome back, guys, as we build and mine through another session of jaw-dropping stories. The gentle placement of blocks and soft ambient sounds provide the perfect backdrop for today's collection of wild tales from the internet's front page. There's something oddly satisfying about discovering your roommate selling your shower footage and watching justice unfold in real time. To think someone would violate your privacy in such a profound way, turning your most vulnerable moments into profit without consent. What makes today's stories particularly fascinating is how quickly these situations escalate from small red flags to full-blown life-altering revelations. From hidden cameras to financial exploitation by parents claiming disability benefits, we're diving into a world where trust is shattered and rebuilt in the most unexpected ways. So, settle in and prepare for our first story about a roommate who thought they'd found the perfect passive income stream until it all came crashing down. I was always pretty careful with money, especially when it came to utilities. Living with a roommate meant splitting everything down the middle, and I prided myself on keeping costs low. I'd take quick showers, turn off lights religiously, and unplug appliances when not in use. So when our utility bill suddenly doubled last month, I was beyond confused. "Hey Mark, did you leave something running while you were away last weekend?" I asked, waving the bill at him over breakfast. He barely looked up from his phone. "Nope. Must be a mistake or rate hike or something." I wasn't satisfied with that answer. The increase was too dramatic to be a simple rate change. So I called the utility company, but they confirmed everything was correct. Our usage had legitimately doubled over the past 3 months. That's when I started investigating. I checked all our electronics, made sure nothing was drawing excess power when turned off, even looked for water leaks. Nothing seemed out of place until I noticed the bathroom vent fan was unusually warm, even when supposedly off. Standing on the toilet, I removed the vent cover and nearly fell when I saw what was inside. A small black device with a tiny lens, carefully positioned to have a perfect view of the shower. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. A camera, in my bathroom, recording my showers. I carefully removed it, my hands shaking with a mix of disgust and rage. It was sophisticated, wireless, with what looked like cloud storage capabilities and plugged into the vent's power source. This wasn't some creepy impulse. This was a calculated long-term violation. The pieces started falling into place. The doubled power bill, Mark's sudden ability to pay for expensive electronics despite constantly complaining about being broke, his insistence that I always used the main bathroom while he used the half bath. I hid the camera in my room and waited for Mark to come home, trying to decide how to handle this. Should I confront him directly? Call the police immediately? The violation felt so profound I could barely process it. When he finally walked in that evening, I couldn't contain myself. "Care to explain why there's a camera hidden in my bathroom vent?" I asked, holding up the device. The color drained from his face. He stammered something about home security, but I cut him off. "Don't insult me by lying. It's aimed directly at the shower, Mark." That's when everything unraveled. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I got into some gambling debt a while back. Some guys were threatening me, and I needed cash fast. So you decided to record me showering?" My voice was eerily calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside. He couldn't look me in the eye. There's, there's a subscription site. People pay good money for this kind of content." I felt physically sick. "How long?" "About 4 months. 4 months. 4 months of my most private moments being broadcast to strangers online. 4 months of violation while I went about my life, completely unaware." "The power drain from the streaming is what spiked our electric bill, isn't it?" He nodded. "How many subscribers?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Mark swallowed hard. "Around 200. 200 people had seen me naked, vulnerable, thinking I was alone. 200 subscribers, paying monthly fees to watch me without my knowledge. The scale of the violation was incomprehensible. And here's where it gets absurd. He had the audacity to ask if we could work something out because he was making good money from the subscribers, as if I might consider becoming a willing participant in his exploitation scheme. "You're disgusting," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," he pleaded. "I'll delete everything. I'll shut down the account. Please, this will ruin my life." I looked at him with utter contempt. "You should have thought about that before you decided to ruin mine." I locked myself in my room and called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes and took my statement while Mark sat on the couch, head in his hands. When they saw the camera and heard my story, they immediately arrested him for voyeurism and distribution of non-consensual intimate imagery. The truth is, I didn't fully process what happened until they took him away. Only then did I break down completely, overwhelmed by the violation and betrayal from someone I had trusted enough to live with. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another shocking story. Now, back to what happened when the police arrived. The officers were incredibly supportive. One of them, a woman named Officer Rivera, sat with me for over an hour as I cycled through shock, anger, and despair. She explained that unfortunately cases like mine were becoming more common, but assured me that they took them extremely seriously. The digital evidence makes these cases easier to prosecute, she explained. The camera itself, the website, the payment records, it all creates a clear trail. They seized Mark's laptop and phone, and what they found was even worse than I'd imagined. He'd set up a dedicated server to store all the footage, neatly organized by date. He had multiple cameras I hadn't discovered yet, one in my bedroom ceiling light and another in the living room aimed at the couch where I often did yoga. The footage went back almost 6 months, not the 4 he'd admitted to. The subscription site was just as sophisticated. He'd created different membership tiers, with higher-paying subscribers getting access to premium content, the most intimate moments he could capture. The police estimated he was making nearly $8,000 a month from the operation. Then came the breaking point. The detective handling the digital evidence found messages between Mark and some subscribers taking special requests, specific things they wanted to see me do, unwittingly, in my own home. Mark had been manipulating situations to fulfill these requests, like accidentally turning up the water heater so I'd have to adjust the shower temperature, or hiding my clean towels so I'd have to walk to my bedroom wrapped in a smaller one. The level of calculation was sickening. This wasn't just opportunistic exploitation, it was coordinated, premeditated violations specifically designed to maximize profits at my expense. I couldn't stay in the apartment after that. How could I ever feel safe there again? I packed essential items that night and went to stay with my parents, who were horrified and immediately supportive. "You'll stay here as long as you need," my mother said, hugging me tighter than she had since I was a child. "The legal process has been grueling but necessary. Mark is facing multiple felony charges, and the investigation has expanded to include the website hosting the content. My lawyer says we have a strong case for significant damages against both Mark and the platform that profited from my exploitation." The hardest part has been knowing that despite our best efforts, some of that footage will probably never be completely erased from the internet. Once something like that is out there, it's nearly impossible to claw it all back. That thought keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm in therapy now, working through the trauma and violation. Some days are better than others. I flinch at vents and ceiling fixtures. I check for cameras everywhere I go. Trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I'm also finding strength I didn't know I had. I've connected with other survivors of similar violations, and am working with an advocacy group to strengthen laws around digital privacy and non-consensual intimate imagery. If any good can come from this nightmare, maybe it's that my story will help protect someone else. The investigation is still ongoing, but Mark remains in custody, unable to make the substantial bail set by a judge who clearly understood the severity of his actions. My lawyer tells me he's facing up to 15 years if convicted on all counts. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm looking for a new place, somewhere I can start fresh, somewhere with no vents above the shower. If you think that invasion of privacy was disturbing, wait until you hear about the woman who discovered her dentist's horrifying secret practice. But first, I never thought my career dreams would lead to uncovering a lifetime of lies. I'd spent years working toward a position with a government contractor that required a top-secret security clearance. The job was perfect, challenging work, amazing benefits, and the kind of stability I'd always wanted. When I passed the final interview, I felt like everything was falling into place. The background check process was intense, but I wasn't worried. I had nothing to hide, good credit, no criminal record, and a pretty boring life overall. So when I received a call requesting an urgent meeting with the security clearance investigators, I was more confused than concerned. "There seems to be a discrepancy we need to discuss," the investigator said when I arrived. Her tone was professional but cold. According to federal records, you've been receiving disability benefits since you were 7 years old. I laughed, thinking it was a mix-up. That's impossible. I've never received disability benefits. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents spanning nearly 2 decades, all with my name, my social security number, and detailed medical evaluations describing conditions I definitely didn't have: severe learning disabilities, partial hearing loss, and a rare nervous system disorder. This is crazy, I said, flipping through the paperwork. I don't have any of these conditions. There must be some mistake. The benefits have been paid to your parents as your guardians, she explained, over $200 monthly for the past 18 years. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this. My parents had always been careful with money, but we weren't poor. We took modest vacations, had decent Christmas presents, lived in a comfortable home. Nothing extravagant, but certainly not struggling. I need to get to the bottom of this, I told the investigator. This has to be fraud or identity theft or something. She nodded sympathetically. We'll pause your clearance investigation until you sort this out, but I should warn you, benefit fraud is a serious federal offense. I drove straight to my parents' house, my thoughts spinning between confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. My parents had always been overprotective, but I'd attributed that to normal parental concern. Now I was questioning everything. When I arrived, they were having dinner, a normal Tuesday evening for them. I placed the folder on the table without a word. My father opened it first, his expression changing instantly. My mother peeked over his shoulder, and I watched as the color drained from her face. We can explain, my father started. That's when everything unraveled. According to them, it began when I was struggling in first grade. I wasn't actually struggling. I was just a daydreamer, a creative kid who got bored easily. But a teacher suggested I might have a learning disability, and rather than get me proper assessment, my parents saw an opportunity. We never had much money, my mother explained, her voice small. Your father's business was failing. We were behind on the mortgage. So you decided to fake disabilities? I was still processing the magnitude of what they'd done. They had systematically created a paper trail of a disabled child who didn't exist. They found doctors willing to sign off on diagnoses with minimal examination. They coached me before rare official assessments, telling me to read more slowly, to ask them to repeat questions, to act confused by simple tasks. Remember how we'd practiced those special tests? My father asked. We told you they were for a special school program. I did remember. They called them thinking games, exercises where they'd time how long it took me to complete puzzles or answer questions. They'd praise me when I took longer or made mistakes. I'd always found it strange, but what kid questions their parents' games? We only did it because we needed the money, my mother insisted, and it helped give you a good life. The betrayal cut deep. Every childhood memory was now tainted, filtered through this new lens of deception. Those special doctor's appointments, the vitamins that were probably nothing, the way they discouraged me from certain physical activities claiming I wasn't built for it, the family friends who were likely benefit investigators. And here's where it gets absurd. They actually tried to convince me to continue the fraud. You don't have to report this, my father said. You can find another job that doesn't require this level of background check, and we can keep things as they are. You have to almost admire the shamelessness, asking your child to become complicit in the fraud perpetrated against them for their entire life. The mental gymnastics required to believe this was somehow still a reasonable path forward is truly Olympic-level delusion. You stole my identity, I said, my voice breaking. You've been lying to me my entire life. You made me participate in fraud without my knowledge or consent. We did what we had to do, my father insisted, his tone hardening. Everything we did was for this family. That's when I realized I couldn't just walk away from this. Not only had they committed fraud against the government, but they'd essentially stolen my identity and medical autonomy. They'd fabricated a medical history that didn't exist, potentially compromising my actual healthcare, and now they expected me to just accept it and move on. I left their house in a daze and drove straight to a lawyer's office the next morning. The lawyer confirmed my worst fears. Not only was this serious fraud, but I was potentially implicated simply because the benefits were in my name. My only protection was to report it myself. Then came the breaking point. While going through more documents with my lawyer, we discovered something I hadn't noticed in my initial shock. The nervous system disorder they'd fabricated included symptoms that would have disqualified me from certain types of employment, specifically including positions requiring security clearances. They hadn't just stolen money, they'd actively created barriers to the exact career path I'd been working toward my entire adult life. Whether intentional or not, they had built a cage around me, limiting my options to keep their fraud intact. That was when any hesitation about reporting them vanished. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity and my future. The investigation moved quickly after I filed a formal report. Federal agents seized records from my parents' home and interviewed the doctors involved. Some of these doctors had apparently been complicit, while others had been deceived by forged medical records from previous physicians. The final tally was staggering. Over 18 years, they had fraudulently collected $346 in disability benefits, all while I grew up believing I was perfectly healthy, because I was. My parents were arrested and charged with multiple federal offenses, including fraud, identity theft, and forgery. They accepted a plea deal that included full restitution, probation, and community service, instead of prison time due to their age and lack of prior criminal record. I haven't spoken to them since the sentencing hearing 3 months ago. The look of betrayal on their faces, as if I had somehow wronged them by exposing their crimes, told me everything I needed to know about where their priorities truly lay. My security clearance was eventually approved after investigators determined I had been an unwitting victim. I started my dream job last month, though the accomplishment feels hollower than I'd imagined. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell me it's all been another elaborate deception. I'm working with a therapist now, trying to process 18 years of manipulated reality. Some days are better than others. The hardest part isn't even the betrayal. It's questioning every memory, every childhood moment, wondering what was genuine and what was performance. My parents still send letters, alternating between apologies and justifications. I've kept them all but haven't opened many. Maybe someday I'll be ready to read them. For now, I'm focused on building a life based on truth, however painful that might be. They say you never really know someone completely, even those closest to you. I just never expected that would apply to the people who gave me life, or that I would need to rediscover who I am after learning who they really were. Family betrayal is devastating, but wait until you hear how one woman's spouse was secretly sabotaging her health in the most calculated way. I started therapy after my divorce 3 years ago. Finding the right therapist can be tough, but Dr. Morgan seemed perfect, compassionate, insightful, and genuinely interested in helping me work through my issues. I opened up to her about everything: childhood traumas, relationship failures, career anxieties, and my deepest insecurities. For the first time in my life, I felt safe being completely vulnerable with someone. Our weekly sessions became the cornerstone of my mental health journey. I'd made so much progress that I'd cut back to bi-weekly appointments, feeling confident that I was finally getting my life back on track. Then came the text from my college roommate, Sarah. "Hey, random question. Do you listen to that podcast, Healing Journeys? The latest episode about the woman with trust issues after her husband cheated with her sister sounds exactly like what happened to you." I hadn't heard of the podcast, but that description was uncomfortably specific. My ex-husband did have an affair with my sister, which had been the primary focus of many therapy sessions. Still, cheating stories can be similar, right? Just a weird coincidence. But curiosity got the better of me. I found the podcast and started listening to the episode Sarah mentioned. Within minutes, my stomach was in knots. The story wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine, down to specific conversations and incidents that only my therapist knew about. The host changed names and a few minor details, but anyone who knew me well would recognize my story instantly. I binge-listened to previous episodes, finding 5 more that featured my experiences: my complicated relationship with my mother, my workplace harassment incident, even the panic attack I had on a subway that I'd never told anyone but Dr. Morgan about. Each story was presented as an anonymous case study, but they contained intimate details that made me feel completely exposed. The podcast host, Dr. Jessica Morgan, therapist and mental health advocate with over 100,000 weekly listeners. I felt violated in a way that's hard to describe. The person I trusted with my most painful memories and vulnerable moments had been secretly recording our sessions and broadcasting them for entertainment and professional gain. The safe space I thought I had wasn't safe at all. It was content creation for her brand. That's when everything unraveled. I did some research and discovered Healing Journeys was pulling in significant advertising revenue and had recently secured a book deal. Dr. Morgan was literally profiting from my trauma. Each painful revelation I'd shared in confidence had been transformed into content that built her career while I remained in the dark. The podcast was full of her self-congratulatory commentary about how she'd helped these anonymous patients overcome their struggles, taking credit for my hard work and resilience while using my life as entertainment. She even embellished parts to make the stories more dramatic or give herself a more pivotal role in my healing journey. I needed proof before confronting her, so I recorded my next session with her using my phone. I didn't mention the podcast initially. Instead, I shared a completely fabricated story about a recent dating experience, something bizarre and specific enough that it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence if it appeared on her show. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, my made-up dating disaster was the featured story on Healing Journeys, presented as a real therapeutic breakthrough she'd helped a patient achieve. Armed with undeniable evidence, I scheduled a special appointment. I placed my phone on her desk with the recording app open. "I need to discuss something important," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I know about the podcast." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of panic quickly replaced by professional composure. "What podcast?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Healing Journeys, the one where you share my most private experiences with hundreds of thousands of strangers without my knowledge or consent." She started to deny it, but I played the recording of my fake dating story, followed by her podcast version. The color drained from her face, and here's where it gets absurd. Instead of apologizing, she tried to justify it. "I'm helping people," she insisted. "Your experiences, presented anonymously, are providing guidance and comfort to listeners struggling with similar issues. Isn't that a good thing? Your pain is serving a greater purpose." The mental gymnastics required to frame this egregious breach of ethics and law as some kind of altruistic act is truly next-level delusion. Apparently, in her mind, secretly recording and monetizing my trauma without consent was actually a charitable contribution I should be grateful for. "Did your ethics board approve this approach?" I asked, knowing full well they hadn't. "Or did you forget about patient confidentiality when the podcast sponsors started paying?" "I've been careful to change identifying details," she countered, as if that made it acceptable. "No one knows it's you." "I know it's me," I said. "My friends know it's me. You broadcast my sexual assault, my family trauma, my deepest insecurities, things I've never told anyone but you." Then came the breaking point. "Actually," she said, dropping the concerned therapist act entirely, "you signed a consent form when you became my patient that gives me the right to use session material for educational and professional purposes." She pulled out my intake paperwork from 3 years earlier, pointing to a vague clause about anonymous case studies in professional contexts. Nothing about commercial podcasts, nothing about recordings, and certainly nothing that would constitute informed consent for what she'd done. "This doesn't cover secretly recording me and using my life to build your brand," I said, "and you know it." Her next words still make my blood boil. "I've helped you significantly, and this is how you repay me? By threatening my practice? Maybe you haven't made as much progress with your trust issues as I thought." The sheer audacity to gaslight me about trust issues that she created by violating my trust in the most fundamental way possible. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with an ethical lapse, but with someone dangerously manipulative. I stood up, gathered my things, and simply said, "You'll be hearing from the licensing board and my lawyer." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal meetings and ethics complaints. I submitted recordings, podcast episodes, and documentation to the state licensing board. Other patients came forward after I went public, revealing that Dr. Morgan had done the same to them. The licensing investigation was thorough and damning. They found recording equipment hidden in her office furniture and a detailed content calendar, mapping out which patient stories would feature in upcoming episodes. Her license was revoked permanently, and she's now facing multiple lawsuits, including mine. The podcast platform removed all episodes after receiving cease and desist letters, But the damage was already done. My private struggles had been entertainment for thousands of strangers. I still get anxious thinking about how many people heard my most vulnerable moments without my knowledge. The legal case is ongoing, but my lawyer is confident we'll win substantial damages. More importantly, we're pushing for stronger regulations around therapist confidentiality in the digital age. I've started seeing a new therapist, though it took months before I could bring myself to open up again. The irony isn't lost on me. I now have trust issues about discussing my trust issues. Every time I share something personal, I can't help wondering if it's being recorded or if it'll somehow become public. The whole experience has been a painful reminder that even the spaces we think are safest can be violated when someone prioritizes their gain over basic human decency. I trusted Dr. Morgan with parts of myself I'd never shared with anyone, and she turned that trust into content, my healing into entertainment, my vulnerability into profit. Trust is fragile, especially when someone violates your privacy. But imagine discovering your partner has been tracking your most intimate biological processes for a sinister purpose. I'd been with Alex for about a year when things started getting weird. We'd always been careful about birth control. I was on the pill and we used condoms as backup. We talked about kids and agreed that maybe someday, but definitely not anytime soon. I was focused on my career and we'd only moved in together 3 months earlier. So when I started feeling nauseous and exhausted all the time, pregnancy wasn't my first thought. But after 2 weeks of what I assumed was a lingering flu, my friend suggested taking a test just to rule it out. Positive. Immediately positive. Not even a faint line or wait time, just bam, pregnant. I was in shock. How could this happen when we were so careful? I checked my pill pack. I hadn't missed any. I counted back and couldn't figure out when it could have happened. When I told Alex, his reaction wasn't what I expected. He wasn't surprised or shocked. Instead, he was happy. Like, really happy. Suspiciously happy for someone who had repeatedly said he wasn't ready for kids. "This is amazing news," he said, hugging me while I stood there rigid with confusion. "I know we weren't planning this, but maybe it's meant to be." "I don't understand how this happened," I said, still trying to process. "I never missed a pill," he shrugged. "Birth control isn't 100% effective. We got lucky, I guess." Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. This wasn't in my life plan right now, and something about his reaction kept nagging at me. Over the next few days, as I grappled with this life-changing development, I started noticing other strange things. Alex was suddenly very interested in my prenatal care, insisting on specific vitamins. He began talking about moving to a bigger apartment, even though our lease had just started. And he mentioned calling his parents to tell them the news. Parents he'd always described as conservative and judgmental about children out of wedlock. "Don't you think we should wait until after the first trimester?" I asked, remembering that was standard advice. "No need," he said confidently. "Everything's going to be fine." His certainty was unnerving. It was almost like he'd been preparing for this. One evening while Alex was at a work event, I felt sick again and went looking for some ginger tea on his side of the pantry. That's when I found them, 3 boxes of my birth control brand, unopened. Why would he have these? I only ever picked up my prescription once a month from my pharmacy. Confused, I decided to check his laptop for answers. We knew each other's passwords. We weren't secretive people. Or so I thought. That's when everything unraveled. In his downloads folder, I found a subfolder labeled Project Future. Inside were screenshots of my period tracking app, dozens of them, dating back months. He'd been logging into my app using my credentials and tracking my cycle. There were screenshots of fertility windows, ovulation predictions, everything. But that wasn't even the worst part. There was a document titled Timeline, with a detailed plan spanning 6 months. It included notes like, replace pills, week of 514, and confirm pregnancy expected by 7/1. He had actually created a project plan to get me pregnant without my knowledge or consent. I felt physically ill. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated reproductive coercion. Digging deeper, I found emails from someone helping him acquire duplicate birth control pill packages. The pills in these packages had been tampered with, some replaced with sugar pills, others microwaved to reduce effectiveness. He'd been systematically switching my real pills with these duds for months. The timeline document also contained a section labeled Why, which explained his motivation. His work visa was expiring in 8 months, and his company wasn't sponsoring renewals due to downsizing. But there was another option. If he was the father of a child with an American citizen, me, he could apply for a family visa. A pregnancy meant he wouldn't have to leave the country. He'd been planning to trap me with a pregnancy to solve his immigration problems. As I sat there, shaking with rage and betrayal, I found one more document, a script. He'd actually written out talking points for when I discovered the pregnancy, with specific responses to any concerns I might raise. He had planned every detail, down to which week would be optimal for me to get pregnant based on my work projects. The level of calculation was chilling. This wasn't an impulsive act or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was months of sustained deception designed to remove my reproductive autonomy for his benefit. I couldn't bear to be in the apartment when he returned. I packed an overnight bag and went to my friend Mia's place, taking screenshots of everything I'd found for evidence. I didn't tell her what happened right away, just that Alex and I had a serious problem. That night, he texted multiple times asking where I was. I responded only to say I was safe and needed space. Meanwhile, I was researching my options, both regarding the pregnancy and the relationship. The next morning, I called a clinic and made an appointment to discuss my options. Only after that did I text Alex, asking him to meet me at a coffee shop near Mia's apartment, somewhere public. When he arrived, he acted concerned, asking what was wrong and why I'd disappeared. I placed my phone on the table between us, screen displaying the Project Future folder. "Want to tell me what this is?" I asked quietly. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, then shock, then something like embarrassment, but not quite guilt. Not enough guilt for what he'd done. "You went through my computer?" That was his first response. Not an apology, not an explanation, just indignation that I'd discovered his scheme. The sheer audacity of thinking he was the wronged party in this situation is genuinely impressive. Imagine meticulously planning to override someone's bodily autonomy for months and then having the nerve to be offended when they find out about it. "I found your stash of my birth control first," I said. "The computer just filled in the blanks. How could you do this?" And here's where it gets absurd. His justification was that he was doing it for us. "We're perfect together," he insisted. "I knew you'd be hesitant about the timing, but once it happened, you'd see it was the right decision, and this way, I can stay in the country, and we can be a family. You decided to create a human being, without my consent, so you could get a visa?" I was struggling to keep my voice down. "You violated me in one of the most fundamental ways possible." "Don't be dramatic," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "People have accidental pregnancies all the time, and you'll be a great mother." "This wasn't an accident," I said. "You systematically tampered with my medication. That's abuse." His expression hardened. "So what are you going to do? Report me to the police? They'll never take this seriously. And what about the baby? Our baby?" The way he emphasized "our" made my skin crawl, as if his deliberate sabotage gave him equal claim to my body and this pregnancy. "There isn't going to be a baby," I said. "I have an appointment tomorrow to discuss my options." Things went from bad to unhinged. He started crying, then pleading, then threatening, a complete emotional roller coaster in the middle of the coffee shop. He switched tactics rapidly, trying to find whatever would work to control the situation. When begging didn't work, he tried to guilt me. When guilt failed, he moved to threats. "If you do that, we're done," he said, as if that was some kind of devastating consequence rather than exactly what I wanted. "We're already done," I replied. "I'm getting an abortion, I'm moving out, and I'm filing a police report for reproductive coercion and tampering with medication." "No one will believe you," he insisted. "And who knows if those screenshots will even hold up as evidence." I smiled for the first time in days. "That's why I recorded this entire conversation." I pointed to the phone between us. "You just admitted to everything." I left him sitting there and went straight to the police station. As he predicted, they weren't sure how to categorize the crime. Reproductive coercion exists in a legal gray area in many places. But the medication tampering was clearly illegal, and they took a report. I terminated the pregnancy the following week. It was a difficult decision emotionally, but the right one for me. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into the world under these circumstances, conceived through deception and manipulation. Alex was charged with tampering with a controlled substance. It wasn't the most serious charge, but it resulted in probation and completely destroyed his visa renewal prospects. He left the country 3 months later. I've since connected with advocacy groups working on legislation specifically addressing reproductive coercion. It's frighteningly common but rarely discussed. I share my story now as a warning about this form of abuse that flies under the radar but can completely derail someone's life. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. I'm single now, focusing on healing, and much more careful about who I allow into my life. Some betrayals cut too deep to forget, but they can at least serve as protection against future harm. Reproductive coercion is terrifying, but wait until you hear about the person who discovered their neighbor's disturbing activities through an unexpected technological glitch. I never meant to spy on my neighbors. It happened completely by accident when I was setting up my new smart home system. I'm fairly tech savvy and had just installed security cameras, smart lights, and a video doorbell throughout my house. Everything was working great until I noticed something strange on my app. Camera feeds that definitely weren't from my property. At first I thought it was a glitch. There were 4 extra video feeds showing rooms I didn't recognize. I figured maybe the app was pulling demo footage or something, but then I saw movement on one of the feeds, a living room with toys scattered around and a woman walking through. That's when I realized I was somehow connected to someone else's camera system. I checked my network settings and discovered that my system had automatically connected to nearby cameras on the same frequency. Apparently, my neighbors hadn't changed their default password, and our systems were compatible enough to link up. I immediately tried to disconnect, but the process wasn't intuitive, and while I was figuring it out, I noticed something on one of the feeds that made me pause. The Harrises, a couple in their early 40s who lived across the street. I recognized their kitchen. They had been foster parents for years and were currently caring for 3 children, 2 boys around 7 and 9, and a girl who couldn't have been more than 5. Everyone in the neighborhood admired them for their selfless dedication to children in need. They were active in the community, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and seemed like genuinely good people. But what I was seeing didn't match that reputation at all. Mrs. Harris was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Nothing unusual about that. But then she pulled out a small bottle from her pocket and carefully measured a powder into each of the 3 smaller plates, not into her plate or her husband's. I told myself it must be some kind of children's vitamin or supplement. That had to be it, but something about her furtive movements, the way she glanced over her shoulder before doing it, sent up red flags. I kept watching, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with my accidental voyeurism, but unable to look away. When dinner was served, the children ate without complaint. About 30 minutes later, all 3 began to appear drowsy. The youngest could barely keep her head up at the table. Mr. Harris carried each of them to bed, though it was only 7 p.m. This happened 3 more times that week while I was still trying to figure out how to properly disconnect from their system. Each evening, the same routine: powder in the food, early bedtime, extremely drowsy children. Once, the older boy complained about feeling fuzzy, and Mrs. Harris simply said, "That's just because you're tired, sweetie." That's when everything unraveled. One afternoon, I saw Mrs. Harris sorting pills from several different bottles into a weekly organizer, the kind typically used for prescription medications, but these weren't prescription bottles. I recognized the packaging of over-the-counter sleep aids, Benadryl, and what looked like anti-anxiety medication. She was crushing these into powder and storing them in unmarked containers. Later that day, I overheard a conversation between the Harrises that chilled me to my core. "The caseworker is coming tomorrow," Mr. Harris said. "Make sure they're all dosed a little lighter so they can answer questions, but not be too energetic." "I know how to handle it," Mrs. Harris replied irritably. "Been doing this long enough. Besides, we get an extra $1,500 for Emily's special needs designation, worth a little extra effort." They were deliberately sedating these children, not for any medical reason, but to make them easier to manage and to qualify for higher foster care payments by making them appear to have special needs. I felt physically sick. These children had already been removed from their original homes due to some kind of trauma or neglect, only to be placed with people who were drugging them for profit. The system that was supposed to protect them had delivered them into another form of abuse. I couldn't just disconnect and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I also knew that if I reported them directly, they might suspect it was me, especially if I mentioned the camera feeds. We weren't close, but as neighbors, there could be awkward, even dangerous repercussions if they knew I had turned them in. After a sleepless night, I decided to make an anonymous report to Child Protective Services. I explained what I had witnessed, being honest about accidentally accessing their camera system. I offered to provide the video evidence if they could find a way to accept it anonymously. The CPS worker who took my call was initially skeptical, until I described specific conversations and events that no one could have known without actually witnessing them. She arranged for me to upload the videos to a secure server without revealing my identity. 3 days later, CPS workers arrived at the Harris home with police officers. From my window, I watched as they interviewed the couple separately. They must have found the medication or other evidence because within hours, the children were being gently led to separate cars, clutching small backpacks of belongings. The next day, Mrs. Harris stormed across the street and pounded on my door. Somehow, she had figured out I was the one who reported them. Maybe it was just process of elimination, or maybe she had realized her camera system had been compromised. "How dare you spy on us and spread lies?" she hissed when I answered. "You've destroyed our family and our reputation based on things you don't understand." I didn't engage with her accusations. I simply said, "I saw you drugging those children. The evidence speaks for itself." Her face contorted with rage. "They were difficult children with behavioral problems. We were helping them. You have no idea what it takes to manage kids like that." There's something uniquely repulsive about watching someone justify abuse as if they're the real victim in the situation. The mental gymnastics required to frame secretly drugging children for profit as some noble sacrifice deserving of sympathy is truly Olympic-level delusion. "If what you were doing was appropriate, you wouldn't have been hiding it from the caseworkers," I replied calmly, "and you wouldn't have been discussing how to dose them to maximize your payments." She left with threats of lawsuits and social ostracism, but the damage to their reputation was already done. The police investigation had uncovered even more than I had witnessed. The Harrises had been fostering for over 7 years and had cared for 26 children during that time. Records showed that many of these children had mysteriously developed symptoms that qualified them for higher rate special needs payments, symptoms that often disappeared after leaving the Harris home. Medical tests on the current children showed various sedatives and antihistamines in their systems, none of which had been prescribed. Financial records revealed that the couple had collected over $200,000 in enhanced payments for alleged special needs care. Text messages between them discussed strategies for keeping children subdued during caseworker visits and which medications worked best for which behaviors. And here's where it gets absurd. They had actually written a blog about the challenges and rewards of caring for special needs foster children. They had given interviews to local papers about their calling to help the most vulnerable children. They had even started a support group for other foster parents, where they lightly spread their abusive techniques disguised as coping strategies. The community was in shock. These were people who had been invited into homes, trusted with children at community events, and praised for their apparent selflessness. Parents who had allowed their kids to attend playdates at the Harris home were overwhelmed with guilt, reviewing every interaction for signs they had missed. The 3 children were placed in genuine therapeutic foster homes where they received proper care and assessment. The older boy, once free from being constantly sedated, showed no signs of the behavioral issues the Harrises had reported. The little girl, who had barely spoken in their care, began talking animatedly within weeks of her new placement. As for the Harrises, they were charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, medical neglect, fraud, and obtaining funds under false pretenses. They initially pleaded not guilty, claiming they were just doing what was necessary to manage difficult children. But as the evidence mounted and former foster children came forward with similar stories, they accepted a plea deal. Mr. Harris was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Mrs. Harris received 10 years as the primary caregiver who had administered the medications. They were ordered to pay restitution to the state foster system and were permanently barred from working with or caring for children in any capacity. I still think about those kids often, about how systems designed to protect the vulnerable can be manipulated by those with the worst intentions, about how appearances of virtue can mask horrifying private behavior. But mostly, I think about how a simple technical glitch revealed a truth that might otherwise have remained hidden for years. Sometimes I feel guilty about accidentally accessing their cameras. But then I remember the faces of those drowsy children, struggling to stay awake at the dinner table, and I know that whatever privacy boundaries were crossed, it was worth it to get them out of that house. The exploitation of vulnerable people is horrifying, but imagine discovering your fiancé had been preparing for your death in the most calculated financial scheme. Planning a wedding while house hunting pushed me to get our financial affairs in order. David and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for one, and we were finally ready to buy our first home together. The mortgage lender needed a mountain of paperwork: tax returns, bank statements, investment accounts, and insurance policies. I offered to compile everything since I'm the organized one in our relationship. Everything's in the filing cabinet in my office, David told me, handing over his keys. The blue folders are financial stuff. Take whatever you need. David's home office was typically off limits to me, not because he explicitly forbade it, but because he valued his privacy, and I respected that. He worked as a financial advisor, so client confidentiality was important. I'd never had reason to dig through his files before. The blue folders were right where he said they'd be, neatly labeled: taxes, investments, insurance, etc. I grabbed what we needed, but as I was closing the drawer, I noticed another blue folder tucked behind the others with no label. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it out. Inside were life insurance policies, not unusual for a financial advisor to have. What was unusual was whose names were on them. There was one for me, for $2 million, one for my father, for $1.5 million, one for my mother, also for $1.5 million, and one for my sister, for $1 million. All had been taken out within the past 2 years. All listed David as the sole beneficiary. My stomach dropped. David and I had never discussed life insurance. He'd never mentioned taking out policies on me, let alone on my family members. The amounts were staggering, and the policies had been active for months. How was this even possible? Don't you need someone's consent to insure their life? I photographed every document, then carefully returned the folder exactly as I'd found it. I needed to think before confronting him. There had to be a logical explanation, right? Maybe it was standard practice for engaged couples. Maybe he'd meant to surprise me with responsible financial planning, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. Why would he be the beneficiary on my parents' policies instead of me? Why would he insure my sister at all? And why keep it hidden in an unlabeled folder? I called my insurance agent the next day under the pretense of reviewing my auto policy. After some general questions, I casually asked how someone would go about taking out life insurance on their fiancé. That's complicated, she explained. Typically, you need the person's knowledge and consent: signatures, medical exams, the works. The only exception would be if you had power of attorney or could somehow forge their signature and information. My blood ran cold. None of us had undergone medical exams for these policies. I certainly hadn't signed anything. That night, I waited until David was asleep, then checked his laptop. I knew his password. It was my birth date. He always said he chose it because you're my whole life. The irony wasn't lost on me now. What I found horrified me. Hidden in a folder labeled Client Research were documents about poisoning techniques that leave minimal traces, articles about making deaths look like accidents or natural causes, and a spreadsheet tracking my family's routines and medical histories. But that wasn't even the worst part. There was also a folder named Financials that contained his personal banking information. David was $430,000 in debt to what appeared to be loan sharks and underground gambling operations. Some of the emails contained thinly veiled threats about payment deadlines. I felt like I was going to be sick. The man sleeping peacefully in our bed, the man I was planning to marry in 4 months, had taken out fraudulent life insurance policies on me and my family. He was researching untraceable poisons. He owed nearly $500,000 to dangerous people. He was planning to kill us for the insurance money. I couldn't confront him. It would be too dangerous. Instead, I forwarded everything to my personal email, then meticulously covered my digital tracks. I erased the sent email, cleared the browser history, and put the computer back exactly as I'd found it. The next morning, I acted completely normal. I kissed him goodbye as he left for work, then immediately called the police. They connected me to a detective specializing in fraud and financial crimes, who asked me to come in immediately with the evidence. Detective Martinez listened intently as I explained everything, examining the photos of the insurance policies and the forwarded files. "You did the right thing coming to us," she assured me. "This is extremely serious. We need to move carefully, but quickly." The investigation revealed that David had indeed forged our signatures using documents I had signed during our engagement. Lease agreements, joint bank accounts, even birthday cards. He had friends at several insurance companies who had helped push the policies through without the required medical exams, listing them as simplified issue policies. And here's where it gets absurd. When confronted by police, David actually tried to claim that the poisoning research was for a thriller novel he was writing in his spare time. A novel that apparently required detailed notes on my father's heart condition and my mother's medication schedule. A novel that needed real financial projections of insurance payouts and debt repayments. A novel so secret he'd never once mentioned this burning literary ambition to me in 3 years of relationship. The mental gymnastics required to believe that someone would meticulously research how to murder their fiancé's entire family as a creative writing exercise is truly Olympic-level delusion. Then came the breaking point. As investigators dug deeper into David's background, they discovered something that made my near miss even more chilling. His previous girlfriend, Melissa, had died 2 years before we met, just 6 months after he'd taken out a similar policy on her life. Her death had been ruled accidental, a fatal allergic reaction to shellfish at a restaurant. David had collected $750,000 and moved to my city shortly afterward. Investigators reopened Melissa's case, exhuming her body for additional toxicology tests. The results are still pending, but preliminary findings have uncovered traces of a compound that can trigger anaphylaxis symptoms identical to shellfish allergies. David was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, and is now being investigated for Melissa's death as well. His associates at the insurance companies are also facing charges for their roles in the scheme. I've been cooperating with the prosecution, providing every piece of evidence I can. The investigators found a calendar on his phone with a date marked 3 weeks in the future, a dinner he was planning for my whole family at our home. The menu included seafood risotto. 3 weeks. That's how close I came to losing everything. They say when someone shows you who they are, believe them. But David never showed me who he really was. Not until I accidentally discovered it myself. For 3 years, I shared my life, my dreams, and my bed with someone who saw me and my family as nothing more than walking insurance policies. I've moved to a new city now, changed my name, started therapy. Some days are better than others. I still flinch when my phone rings with an unknown number, still check my rearview mirror more often than necessary. David's in custody awaiting trial, but his gambling associates aren't, and I sometimes wonder if they know about me. Melissa's parents reached out to me. We formed an unusual bond, united by our shared experience with the same monster. They've waited 2 years for answers about their daughter's death. I hope the new investigation brings them some measure of peace, though nothing can bring her back. If there's anything I've learned from this nightmare, it's to trust my instincts. Something felt wrong about those insurance policies the moment I saw them, but I still searched for innocent explanations because I couldn't face the alternative. Never again. Now, if something feels off, I don't second guess myself. I'm sharing this story as a warning. The most dangerous predators don't look like monsters. They look like financial advisors with warm smiles who remember your favorite flowers and call you the love of their life while calculating how much your death is worth to them. Some betrayals involve elaborate financial schemes, but others exploit your digital identity in ways you'd never expect, like what happened to this next person. It started with a text message at 3 a.m. that made absolutely no sense. "Still on for tonight? You never confirmed the hotel." I didn't recognize the number, so I assumed it was a wrong number and went back to sleep. But then more messages started coming in from different numbers. Some were asking about my rates. Others were angry, saying I'd taken their deposits but never showed up. A few were explicit, referencing specific acts they claimed I'd advertised. At first, I thought it was some bizarre spam campaign or a cruel prank. Then someone sent a screenshot of the advertisement they'd found me on. My heart nearly stopped. There I was, my face, my name, well, a slightly altered version, Jessie instead of Jessica, and my actual city. But the body in the photos wasn't mine. Someone had expertly photoshopped my face onto another woman's body in various provocative poses and states of undress. I immediately Googled the website from the screenshot and found not just one profile, but 3 different ones across various escort sites, all using my photos. Most used pictures from my Instagram and Facebook, but some were clearly manipulated to create explicit content. The profiles had been active for at least 4 months based on the review dates. I felt violated in a way that's hard to describe. Someone had stolen my identity and was using my face to solicit sex work. Not that there's anything wrong with consensual sex work, but this was fraud, identity theft, and it was happening without my knowledge or consent. My first thought was that it must be an ex-boyfriend with a grudge, but the profiles were too detailed, too personal. They included little mannerisms I have, always twirls her hair when she's thinking, my favorite wine, and even mentioned the small birthmark on my shoulder that isn't visible in most photos. This was someone who knew me intimately. I called my best friend Megan in a panic. We'd been inseparable since college, and she was always my first call in a crisis. She didn't answer, which was unusual even at 7 a.m., so I texted her screenshots and an SOS message. While waiting for her response, I started the grueling process of contacting each website to report the fraudulent profiles. Some were cooperative, others required police reports before they would take action. I spent hours documenting everything, taking screenshots, and filing reports with local police and internet crime units. When Megan finally called back that afternoon, something felt off. Her normally expressive voice was flat, and she seemed more annoyed than concerned. "That's really messed up," she said after I explained everything. "But, it's just the internet. No one who actually knows you would believe you're an escort." Her dismissive tone didn't sit right. This wasn't some minor inconvenience. It was a serious violation that was actively disrupting my life and potentially endangering me if any of these men decided to track me down in person. "I have to get these taken down," I insisted. "I'm getting messages from strange men who think they've paid for services. Some are getting aggressive." "Just change your number," she suggested with a strange edge to her voice. That's when I remembered. Megan was the only person besides me who had access to all my social media accounts. I'd given her my passwords years ago when she helped manage my photography business page. She knew all my mannerisms, had unlimited access to my photos, and certainly knew about my birthmark. The thought seemed ridiculous. Megan was my best friend. We'd been in each other's lives for a decade. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She wouldn't, would she? But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and I couldn't shake it. I decided to set a trap. I created a fake email, pretending to be an interested client, and contacted one of the escort profiles using my photos. I asked for specific availability, mentioning I'd be in town on business next week. The response came within an hour, with available dates and rates. The writing style was painfully familiar. The same slightly formal tone Megan always used in emails. The same habit of using ellipses instead of periods. Even the email address was a variation of a username she'd used for gaming. Misty Magic, changed to Misty Nights. My hands were shaking as I called my husband to tell him what I'd discovered. He was as shocked as I was, but agreed the evidence was compelling. Still, we needed absolute proof before accusing my best friend of a decade. I decided to follow the money. I replied to Misty saying I'd like to book a date, asking how to pay the deposit. She provided a Venmo account under yet another variation of the same username. I searched the transaction history on my own Venmo and found several payments to Megan over the past few months for dinner or movie night, evenings when we'd actually split the bill in cash or I had paid for both of us. That's when everything unraveled. I requested access to my phone records and found dozens of text messages between Megan and unknown numbers that aligned perfectly with the times I'd been receiving strange texts. She had somehow set up call and text forwarding from my number to hers, intercepting some of the messages before I saw them. Armed with this evidence, I confronted her. I asked her to meet for coffee, set my phone to record, and laid out everything I'd found. I expected denial. What I got instead was almost worse. "So what if I did?" she said, her face hardening. "Do you have any idea how easy your life has been because of your looks? Everything is handed to you. Jobs, attention, your perfect husband. I've been working twice as hard for half as much my entire life. I was stunned into silence. This person I'd trusted, whose problems I'd helped solve, whose breakups I'd consoled her through, whose rent I'd helped pay when she was struggling, she'd been harboring this resentment the entire time. These men are willing to pay thousands just to spend time with someone who looks like you, she continued. Why should you be the only one who profits from your genetic lottery win? And here's where it gets absurd. She actually tried to frame her actions as some twisted form of social justice, redistributing my pretty privilege by scamming men online. She explained her system. She'd collect the deposits, string clients along with excuses, and eventually ghost them after extracting as much money as possible. No services were ever provided. It was pure fraud using my face as bait. The entitlement is breathtaking. Imagine deciding your friend's appearance is a community resource you're entitled to monetize. Like her face is public property, you can lease out because you've deemed her too privileged. The mental gymnastics required to frame identity theft and fraud as righteous wealth redistribution is truly impressive. You've put me in danger, I said, my voice shaking. These men have my face, my general location. What if one of them decides to find me? She shrugged. Collateral damage. Besides, I never used your exact address. That callous response was when I realized how completely our friendship had been a facade. The person sitting across from me was a stranger wearing my best friend's face. I've already filed police reports, I told her. I have evidence linking you to all of this. They'll be contacting you. Then came the breaking point. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. I know everything about you, every embarrassing secret, every private moment. If you do this, I'll make sure everyone knows about the abortion you had in college, about your brother's drug problem, about the real reason you and Chris broke up before you met your husband. The threat confirmed that going to the police had been the right decision. This wasn't just about the escort profiles anymore. This was about someone who viewed our entire friendship as transactional, as leverage to be used against me. I stood up, gathering my things. The police already have everything, including this conversation I just recorded. You might want to get a lawyer. The aftermath was as messy as you'd expect. Megan was charged with identity theft, fraud, and extortion based on her threats. The investigation uncovered over $30,000 she'd collected from various men using my photos over 8 months. Some of her victims came forward, adding additional fraud charges. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was explaining to mutual friends what had happened. Many couldn't believe it. Some suggested I was overreacting or that I should have handled it privately to protect her. A few even sided with her, buying into her twisted narrative about pretty privilege and suggesting I somehow deserved what she did. It's been a year since everything happened. Megan took a plea deal and is serving 18 months, with probation to follow. I've had to change my phone number, lock down all my social media, and be much more careful about the photos I share online. I still occasionally get messages from men who found the old profiles archived somewhere. The experience has changed how I trust people. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just destroy one relationship. It makes you question all of them. Every friendship feels potentially conditional now. Every kindness possibly hiding resentment. But I'm rebuilding. I've connected with other victims of digital identity theft, forming a support network and advocating for stronger laws against online impersonation. I've learned which websites respond quickly to fraudulent content reports and which require legal pressure. I'm working with a therapist to process the betrayal by someone I considered family. If there's anything positive that came from this nightmare, it's a deeper understanding of digital vulnerability and how quickly online fraud can impact your real life. I'm much more careful now, but I refuse to live in fear or stop connecting with people. One person's betrayal doesn't get to define my entire worldview. Identity theft by a trusted friend is devastating, but imagine discovering your mother-in-law had been collecting your genetic material for an unthinkable purpose. I've always had a complicated relationship with my mother-in-law, Sandra. From the moment my husband Michael introduced us 5 years ago, she was polite but cold. She'd smile while asking invasive questions about my family background, education, and career prospects, all while maintaining perfect southern charm that made it impossible to call her out without seeming overly sensitive. Michael would always assure me, that's just how she is with everyone. She'll warm up eventually. But 4 years into our marriage, that warming had never happened. If anything, her behavior had become more peculiar over time. It started with small things. Whenever we visited their home for Sunday dinners, she'd make comments about my appearance, particularly my hair. Such an unusual texture, she'd say while reaching out to touch it uninvited. Who in your family does it come from? Or she'd ask oddly specific questions about my grandparents' birthplaces and any health conditions that ran in my family. I tried to brush it off as the awkward curiosity of a woman from a different generation. My family is mixed race. My father is black and Native American, my mother Filipina and Spanish, and I assume Sandra, from her small Tennessee town, simply didn't know how to navigate conversations about ethnicity gracefully. But then, about 6 months ago, strange things started happening in our home. My hairbrush would disappear, only to reappear days later, cleaned of hair. At first, I thought maybe Michael had used it and cleaned it, though that would be out of character for him. When I mentioned these disappearances, he seemed genuinely confused. Other personal items began vanishing too. My comb, the bathroom trash can liner, even an old toothbrush I had forgotten to throw away. Each time I felt increasingly uneasy, but couldn't pinpoint why. Was I losing my mind, becoming forgetful, or was something more sinister happening? The mystery deepened when Sandra volunteered to house sit while we took a weekend trip to celebrate our anniversary. We hadn't asked for a house sitter. We don't even have pets, but she insisted, claiming she wanted to deep clean the place as a gift to us. Something about her eagerness set off alarm bells, but Michael thought I was being paranoid. She's just trying to be helpful, he said. You know how she is about cleaning. Still, my instincts were screaming. So I did something I never thought I'd do in my own home. I installed a small security camera, disguised as a phone charger in our bedroom and bathroom before we left. I told myself it was just to put my mind at ease, that I'd laugh at myself later for being so suspicious. I wasn't laughing when we returned. The camera had captured Sandra methodically, going through our bathroom, opening drawers, examining items, and, most disturbingly, collecting hair from my hairbrush and placing it in a small Ziploc bag. She did the same with a few strands from the shower drain and even took a cotton swab to the inside of my electric toothbrush. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. With shaking hands, I showed Michael the footage. His face went from confusion to shock to anger as he watched his mother essentially collecting my DNA from around our home. Even more troubling, she seemed practiced at it, like this wasn't her first time. I don't understand, he kept saying. Why would she do this? What's she looking for? I needed answers before confronting her. While Michael was processing this betrayal, I did some digital detective work. Since we'd helped Sandra set up her iPad last Christmas, I knew her Apple ID and password. I hesitated to invade her privacy, but given what she'd been doing in our home, my moral qualms quickly evaporated. Her email history revealed everything. Over the past year, Sandra had ordered 6 different DNA tests from various companies. She'd also been corresponding with a private laboratory that specialized in genetic analysis, sending them samples and requesting specific types of testing. The emails referenced specimen A and compatibility analysis. But that wasn't even the worst part. In her Google Drive, I found a document titled Michael's Future. It contained a detailed family tree going back 5 generations, with notations about ethnicity percentages, hereditary conditions, and, most chillingly, a section called Acceptable Parameters for Offspring. She had created an actual genetic screening checklist for anyone who might bear her grandchildren. According to her notes about me, labeled Specimen A, she suspected I was hiding my true ethnic background and was determined to prove I wasn't genetically compatible with her son. There were comments about certain physical traits that were concerning and require verification. She'd even calculated supposed risks for any potential children based on her amateur genetic analysis. I felt physically ill reading this. It wasn't just invasion of privacy. It was eugenics, plain and simple. She was collecting my DNA without consent to determine if I was racially pure enough to have her grandchildren. The evidence was undeniable, but we still needed to confront her. We invited her over, set up our phones to record, and once she was settled with her customary sweet tea, Michael simply placed the Ziploc bag of my hair, the one from the security footage, on the coffee table between us. Mum, we need to talk about this. Her reaction told us everything. Instead of confusion or denial, Her first response was defensive anger. You had no right to go through my things. The absolute gall to act indignant about invasion of privacy while literally collecting someone's genetic material without consent is next-level hypocrisy. It's like a burglar filing a complaint that the homeowner's security camera captured them without permission. We didn't go through your things, Michael replied coldly. We have you on video going through ours, stealing Elisa's hair. Why? And here's where it gets absurd. Sandra straightened up, assumed an air of righteousness, and said, I have a right to protect our family's genetic legacy. You may not care about these things, Michael, but bloodlines matter. I needed to know what she'd be contributing to my grandchildren. She then launched into a disturbing monologue about genetic compatibility and maintaining family traits that sounded like it came straight from a eugenics handbook from the 1920s. She genuinely believed she was performing some kind of public service for our family line by vetting my DNA. Michael was speechless. His mother had always been traditional, sometimes frustratingly so, but this revealed a level of racism and xenophobia that he'd either been blind to or that she'd kept carefully hidden. Have you done this before? I finally asked. Of course, she replied as if it were perfectly normal. I've tested all potential partners in this family. Your cousin Ryan's wife passed with flying colors, Swedish ancestry, minimal health risks. But your sister's fiancé, she made a disapproving noise, Italian and Lebanese, too many cardiac issues 3 generations back. Then came the breaking point. And what did you find out about me? I asked. Since you've been testing me without my knowledge for months. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, enough to know you've been lying about your background. Your African percentage is much higher than you've led us to believe, and there are markers for diabetes in your maternal line. The clinical way she reduced my rich, complex heritage to problematic percentages made my blood boil. But before I could respond, Michael stood up, his voice shaking with rage. Get out of our house, now, and don't contact us again until you understand how monumentally wrong this is. Sandra seemed genuinely shocked by his reaction. In her mind, she was the reasonable one, the protector of family heritage. She actually told him he was being dramatic, and that someday he'd thank her for her foresight. She left in a huff, but the damage was done. Michael was devastated, questioning everything about his upbringing and the values he'd been taught. How had he never seen this side of his mother? Had she always been this way, or had she changed over time? The fallout was swift. Michael's sister was horrified when we told her what happened, revealing that her fiancé had mysteriously been rejected by Sandra, despite his successful career and kind nature. Suddenly, her mother's obsession with their incompatibility made disturbing sense. We consulted a lawyer who confirmed that collecting someone's DNA without consent for testing is illegal in our state. We could press charges if we wanted to, but ultimately we decided that legal action would only prolong the drama. Instead, Michael wrote his mother a lengthy letter explaining exactly why her actions were wrong, morally, legally, and scientifically, and informing her that we would be taking a long break from any contact. We moved across the country 3 months later, partly for my career opportunity, but mostly to put physical distance between us and Sandra. Michael still speaks with his sister regularly, but he hasn't spoken to his mother since that day. The silver lining to this bizarre ordeal is that it prompted us to have serious conversations about family, heritage, and what values we want to pass on to our children. I'm now 4 months pregnant, and we're creating the kind of home where our child will be taught to celebrate their rich, diverse ancestry rather than police it. Sandra doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. Michael says he'll tell her eventually, but she will never have unsupervised access to our child or their hairbrush. Family members overstepping boundaries is one thing, but wait until you hear how one person's wife used the ultimate betrayal of trust to destroy their financial future. I've always been good with money, careful saving, reasonable spending, and regular credit monitoring, the whole responsible adult package. So when Jenny and I decided to buy a house after 5 years of marriage, I was confident we'd sail through the mortgage approval process. My credit score was excellent, we had a solid down payment saved, and our combined income easily covered the monthly payments we'd calculated. The mortgage broker's call blindsided me completely. I'm sorry, Mr. Richards, but we can't approve your application at this time, she said, her voice professionally sympathetic. There appear to be some Discrepancies on your credit report. Discrepancies? I asked. What kind of discrepancies? Well, you have several outstanding loans that are showing high balances. Your debt-to-income ratio is well above our lending threshold. My mind raced. I had one credit card with a small balance and my car loan, which was nearly paid off. That was it. There must be some mistake, I said. Can you tell me what loans you're seeing? She rattled off a list that made my stomach drop. 3 personal loans totaling $78,000, a line of credit for $50,000 that was nearly maxed out, and 5 different credit cards, all approaching their limits. In total, over $200,000 of debt that I had absolutely no knowledge of. I need to investigate this, I told her. This has to be identity theft. I immediately pulled my credit report and confirmed what the broker had told me. All these accounts had been opened within the past 2 years, with activity increasing dramatically in recent months. The addresses and phone numbers listed were variations of my actual information, just different enough that the fraud alerts never triggered to my main contacts. But here's what didn't make sense. The applications all had my fingerprint authorization. Many of these loans were from financial apps that required biometric verification, a fingerprint scan that matched government ID. Not something a random identity thief could fake. I was baffled. Who could possibly have access to both my personal information and my actual fingerprint? The sickening realization crept in slowly. Jenny had access to everything. My social security number, birth certificate, all my personal details, and my fingerprint. Well, I sleep pretty heavily. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed to know. I pretended everything was normal that evening, telling Jenny that the mortgage approval was just taking longer than expected. After she fell asleep, I checked her laptop. She always left it open on her nightstand, and I knew her password. It was our anniversary date. That's when everything unraveled. Her browser history revealed frequent visits to online gambling sites, dozens of them. Her email contained correspondence with loan officers, all using my information. She had a meticulously organized folder containing photos of my driver's license, birth certificate, even screenshots of my bank statements and tax returns. But that wasn't even the worst part. In her drafts folder, I found emails to various family members that she hadn't sent yet. They contained variations of the same message. She was feeling depressed and worthless, was going camping alone to clear her head, and if anything happened to her, it wasn't their fault. There were also searches for how to disappear and start over, and untraceable suicide methods that looked like accidents. She was planning to fake her death and leave me with all the debt. I felt like I was going to be sick. The woman sleeping peacefully beside me, my partner for 5 years, had been systematically stealing my identity while plotting her escape. Meanwhile, I had been planning our future, thinking about which spare bedroom would make the best nursery someday. I spent the night copying evidence, forwarding emails to my personal account, and taking screenshots of everything. When morning came, I could barely look at her. She kissed me goodbye as she left for work, completely unaware that her secret was out. My first stop was the police station to file an identity theft report. The officer taking my statement raised his eyebrows when I explained the situation. "Your wife?" he confirmed. "You're saying your wife did this?" "Yes," I said, showing him the evidence I gathered. "She's been using my fingerprint while I sleep to authorize loan applications." He looked skeptical until I showed him the browser history and email trails. I've seen spouses steal from each other before, but this level of planning is unusual. Next, I visited a lawyer who specialized in both divorce and financial fraud. She advised me to secure all my personal documents immediately and to place a freeze on my credit. She also suggested I find somewhere else to stay. Confronting Jenny alone could be unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "Anyone willing to go to these lengths has already demonstrated they don't have your best interests at heart," she warned me. I called my brother, gave him a brief explanation, and asked if I could stay with him for a while. Then I went home, packed essential belongings, and gathered all my important documents before Jenny returned from work. The confrontation happened that evening when she found me finishing my packing. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. I turned to face her, keeping my voice level, despite the rage and betrayal coursing through me. "I know about the loans, Jenny, all of them, and I know about your escape plan." Her face went through a series of emotions, shock, denial, anger, before settling on something cold and calculated that I'd never seen before. "You went through my computer?" she asked, somehow managing to sound like I was the one who had violated trust. There's something uniquely infuriating about someone who's been systematically destroying your financial life, trying to claim the moral high ground over a privacy breach. It's like an arsonist getting upset that you stepped on their property to put out the fire they started. Yes, after discovering someone had taken out over $200,000 in loans in my name, I did some investigating, I replied. Funny how identity theft will make a person curious. She tried denial first, claiming I was jumping to conclusions. When I mentioned the fingerprint authorizations, she switched to minimization. It was just supposed to be temporary, she insisted. I was going to pay it all back before you ever noticed. With what money? Your gambling winnings? I asked. That's when she crumbled. The facade dropped, and the truth came pouring out in a torrent of excuses and tear-filled explanations. She'd started gambling online about 3 years ago, just for fun at first. Small bets became larger ones. Losses mounted. She took out the first loan to cover a particularly bad loss, convinced she could win it back. But you don't understand how close I am to a big win, she said, her eyes wild with the delusion that plagues gambling addicts. I've developed a system. I just need a little more time, a little more capital, and I can fix everything. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. And if your system failed, you were just going to disappear and leave me with the debt, I said. Make me think you were dead while you started fresh somewhere else. She didn't deny it. She just said, I never meant to hurt you. I almost laughed at the absurdity. You stole my identity, put me hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, planned to fake your death, and you never meant to hurt me. What exactly did you think would happen? I left that night, staying with my brother while the legal process began. The divorce was expedited given the circumstances, but untangling the financial nightmare took much longer. I had to file fraud claims with each lender, provide evidence that the accounts were opened without my knowledge, and fight to have the negative marks removed from my credit report. Jenny's family was horrified by what she'd done. Her parents actually reached out to apologize and offered financial help, which I declined. This wasn't their mess to clean up. Jenny eventually entered treatment for gambling addiction, but by then any chance of reconciliation was long gone. The criminal charges were complicated, because we were married and she technically had authorized access to our home and my personal information. Some of the typical identity theft statutes didn't apply cleanly. However, the biometric fraud, using my fingerprint while I was unconscious, and the clear intent to defraud both me and the lenders resulted in several felony charges. 2 years later, I'm still dealing with the aftermath. My credit has improved but isn't fully recovered. I've had to explain the situation to every potential landlord, lender, and even some employers. I've become almost paranoid about security. My phone and laptop have every possible protection, and I sleep with my bedroom door locked. The most painful part isn't the financial damage, though that's substantial. It's the complete destruction of trust. How do you ever fully trust again after discovering the person who shared your bed was essentially plotting your financial murder? I'm working with a therapist now, trying to process the betrayal without letting it define my future. I've learned more about gambling addiction, which helps me understand Jenny's actions, even if I can never forgive them. And I'm slowly rebuilding my life, one careful, verified step at a time. Financial betrayal by a spouse is devastating, but imagine finding out your coworker has been collecting something deeply personal from you and your colleagues for a disturbing reason. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm where the office culture has always been pretty tight-knit. We're about 60 employees, mostly in our 20s and 30s, with the usual mix of personalities you'd find in any workplace. Nothing extraordinary, just normal people trying to earn a living. About 4 months ago, some of the women in the office started noticing strange things happening in our restroom. Items were disappearing from the trash, not valuable things, but personal waste items. At first, we thought maybe the cleaning crew was being extra thorough, but then Melissa from accounting mentioned that she'd disposed of a pregnancy test wrapper and the test itself, only to find later that the test was gone while the wrapper remained. This set off alarm bells for all of us. Who would take a used pregnancy test, and why? We started comparing notes and realized this had been happening for weeks. Several women recalled disposing of personal items that later vanished, including at least 4 other pregnancy tests. We brought our concerns to management, who seemed concerned but unsure what action to take. Maybe it's just getting caught in other trash when the bins are emptied, our supervisor suggested. It was clear they didn't want to install cameras in the restroom, for obvious privacy reasons, but we needed answers. So we took matters into our own hands. 5 of us women devised a plan. We set up a small motion-activated camera focused only on the trash can. Nothing else in the restroom was visible in the frame. We made sure to post notices that security monitoring was in place, though we didn't specify where the camera was. It felt like an extreme measure, but we were genuinely disturbed. For 3 days, nothing unusual happened. Then, on the 4th day, we checked the footage and collectively gasped. The culprit was Greg from IT. Greg, who brought homemade cookies to office birthday celebrations. Greg, who volunteered for every charity initiative. Greg, who had a framed photo of his nieces on his desk and talked endlessly about being the fun uncle. The footage showed him entering the women's restroom after hours, wearing gloves, methodically going through the trash, and carefully extracting something that he placed in a Ziploc bag. He did this with practiced efficiency, suggesting it wasn't his first time. That's when everything unraveled. We took the footage directly to the head of HR, who called in our general manager. They watched in stunned silence, then immediately scheduled a meeting with Greg and company security for the following morning. I wasn't in the meeting, but according to our HR director, when confronted with the evidence, Greg didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he offered an explanation that was somehow worse than anything we had imagined. I sell them, he admitted. Positive pregnancy tests. There's a huge market online. Apparently, Greg had been running a side business for over 3 years, collecting used positive pregnancy tests from office restrooms and selling them on specialized websites and forums. His clients, women who wanted to trap partners into marriage, convinced them not to leave a relationship, or extort money for fake abortions. He charged $200 per test, with a premium for fresh positives less than 12 hours old. According to the records later found on his work computer, yes, he was stupid enough to run this operation from his work laptop. He'd sold over 300 tests in the past year alone. The complete disconnect required to view your female colleague's intimate medical waste as a business opportunity is genuinely impressive. Like, there's entrepreneurial spirit, and then there's whatever psychological gymnastics routine you need to perform to think, Karen from marketing might be pregnant, that's my retirement plan right there. When asked why he did it, his answer was simple. It's just business. I'm meeting a market demand. No one's getting hurt. No one's getting hurt? He was literally selling tools for reproductive coercion and relationship fraud. He was violating his co-workers' privacy in the most intimate way possible, and he had the audacity to frame it as entrepreneurial innovation. HR fired him on the spot, security escorted him from the building, and our IT department immediately began forensic analysis of his computer. What they found shocked everyone even further. Greg had been doing this at every job he'd held for the past 7 years. His computer contained spreadsheets tracking his inventory and sales across multiple workplaces. He kept detailed notes on which women in each office were likely to be sexually active or trying to conceive, based on overheard conversations and social media stalking. He even had a rotating schedule of which office restrooms to check on which days, like some twisted garbage collection route. But that wasn't even the worst part. He'd expanded his operation beyond just pregnancy tests. He was collecting prescription medication information from discarded packaging, creating profiles of which employees took what medications, and selling that information to various buyers, identity thieves, insurance scammers, and in some cases, potential blackmailers interested in certain stigmatized medications. Our company contacted police, who launched an investigation. They found that Greg had made over $60,000 in untaxed income from his business in the previous year alone. The specialized websites he used operated in murky legal territory, not explicitly illegal in most states, but certainly facilitating various types of fraud. Legal charges were complicated. While stealing trash from private property is technically theft, the value of discarded items is minimal. The privacy violations were clear but difficult to prosecute under existing laws. Ultimately, he faced charges related to tax evasion, operating an unlicensed business, and in a particularly satisfying twist, corporate espionage, since he'd stolen and sold information about employees' prescription medications that could be used by competitors. And here's where it gets absurd. During the investigation, they discovered he had business cards, actual professionally printed business cards for his company called New Beginning Supplies. The cards featured a tasteful stork silhouette and the tagline, "Helping create the future you desire." He'd been handing these out at certain bars and clubs known for hookup culture, targeting women who talked about wanting to lock down a partner. The sheer professionalism he brought to something so fundamentally unhinged is almost impressive. Like, I'm not sure what's more disturbing, the violation itself or the fact that he clearly saw himself as a legitimate entrepreneur providing a valuable service, complete with branding and customer testimonials. The aftermath at our office was intense. Many women felt violated, disgusted, and betrayed. The company provided counseling services and immediately implemented new waste disposal protocols for personal items. They installed actual security cameras in all hallways and upgraded the locks on the restrooms. Some of us who had been affected formed an advocacy group, connecting with employment lawyers and privacy experts to push for stronger workplace protections. We discovered that similar incidents had occurred elsewhere, but victims often had limited legal recourse. The laws simply haven't caught up with this particular type of violation. Our story made local news, then national, sparking conversations about privacy in the workplace and the disturbing online market for pregnancy tests. Several states are now considering legislation specifically addressing the unauthorized collection and sale of personal medical waste and information. As for Greg, his reputation is destroyed. His IT certifications were revoked, and he's essentially unhireable in his field. The last I heard, he was fighting the charges with the bizarre defense that discarded items are public property, an argument not holding up well in court. The experience changed our office culture permanently. We're more cautious now, more aware of potential violations, but we're also more united. Having faced this bizarre breach of trust together, we've created a workplace safety committee that meets monthly to address concerns and review security protocols. I still can't look at a pregnancy test without feeling queasy, thinking about how something so personal could be weaponized. But I take some comfort in knowing that our experience might help protect others through better laws and workplace policies. Sometimes the most disturbing violations lead to the most necessary changes. Some workplace violations are shocking, but wait until you hear how one person discovered their boss was exploiting private company meetings for profit. It all started when my coworker Teresa messaged me privately during a team meeting. Is it weird that I'm getting ads for the exact coffee maker visible in my Zoom background? The one behind my left shoulder? I brushed it off as a coincidence. We're all being tracked online constantly, right? But then similar stories started popping up among our remote team. James got ads for the specific brand of guitar leaning against his wall. Sasha was targeted with promotions for the exact model of monitor she used. Even our most private team member, Derek, who uses a virtual background, mentioned getting oddly specific ads for his prescription medications that were briefly visible on his desk before a meeting. Something wasn't adding up. These weren't generic product categories. They were exact matches for specific items, down to the model number. And in Derek's case, the medication wasn't even visible during the actual meeting. I work in IT security for a mid-sized tech company that transitioned to fully remote work during the pandemic. Our CEO, Martin Geller, had been celebrated for how smoothly he managed the transition, even featured in business magazines for his innovative remote work protocols. The company was thriving, and employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. As the security specialist, I decided to take a closer look at our video conferencing setup. Our company used a customized enterprise version of Zoom that Martin had insisted on configuring personally for optimal security. Given these strange targeting coincidences, I felt justified in reviewing the system architecture. What I found made my blood run cold. Hidden in our conferencing software was a sophisticated data collection plugin that captured screenshots every 30 seconds during all meetings. But it wasn't just taking screenshots of the meeting interface. It was capturing full-screen images, including backgrounds, personal spaces, and anything visible on camera. More disturbing, I discovered the system was also capturing pre-meeting footage. Recording began the moment you clicked the meeting link, not when you officially joined. That explained Derek's medication being captured. He must have organized his desk before enabling his virtual background. But why would our CEO implement this? Was it for security? Training purposes? The plugin wasn't just storing these images, It was processing them through an AI analysis tool and extracting data points before uploading them somewhere external. I needed to dig deeper without alerting Martin. I set up a dummy account and created a testing environment that mimicked our production system. By monitoring the data traffic, I was able to identify where these images were being sent to several data broker companies specializing in consumer habits intelligence. These weren't just any data brokers, they were high-end analytics firms that paid premium prices for real-world imagery of consumers' homes and workspaces. They used sophisticated AI to identify products, brands, lifestyle indicators, income levels, and even relationship status based on environmental cues. This intelligence was then sold to companies for hyper-targeted advertising and product development. That's when everything unraveled. I found a private server storing email correspondence between Martin and these data brokers. Our CEO had been selling our home office screenshots for over a year. The pricing structure was elaborate. Basic screenshots fetched $5, $10 each, but images containing clear product displays or sensitive information commanded premium rates up to $100 per image. Based on the transaction records, Martin had made over $400,000 from selling his employees' privacy. Most disturbing were the special requests, companies paying extra for screenshots of specific employees whose demographics matched their target audience. The invoice records showed our home environments broken down into disturbing categories: high-income female, 30-45, middle-income male with children, luxury product owners, and even prescription medication users. Our personal spaces and belongings were being commodified without our knowledge. But that wasn't even the worst part. Martin had implemented a bonus structure for managers who encouraged employees to keep their cameras on and home offices visible during meetings. Remember those team-building exercises where we shared our work-from-home spaces? The company provided ring lights for better video quality. The meetings that could have been emails, all designed to harvest more valuable images of our personal spaces. The technical sophistication was honestly impressive in the most horrifying way possible. Imagine building an entire corporate culture around extracting maximum surveillance value from your employees while convincing them it's about connection and transparency. Evil genius level stuff here. I needed to report this, but carefully. Martin had friends on the executive team, and whistleblowers don't always fare well, so I created an anonymous email account and compiled my evidence: server logs, email exchanges, transaction records, and the actual plugin code. I sent everything to our board of directors and the general counsel. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I feared they were burying it, or worse, that Martin had intercepted the evidence. Then suddenly an all-company meeting was called with the board chair leading instead of Martin. "We're announcing a leadership change effective immediately," the chair began. Martin wasn't on the call. Following serious allegations regarding privacy violations, Martin Geller is no longer with the company. An investigation confirmed unauthorized data collection and third-party sharing of sensitive information. The company went into crisis management mode. External security consultants were brought in to audit all systems. Legal teams contacted the data brokers to demand deletion of all imagery and halt any ongoing use. HR set up counseling services for employees who felt violated. The fallout was substantial. Several employees quit anyway, having lost trust in the company. Some filed lawsuits. The data brokers faced regulatory investigations, with one ultimately shutting down completely. And Martin? He's now facing both civil and criminal charges for privacy violations, corporate espionage, and fraud. In a strange twist, the board asked if I would lead a new privacy and digital ethics task force. Apparently, the IT team logs showed I was the one who discovered the scheme, despite my attempts at anonymity. I accepted on the condition that we implement radical transparency about all data collection and employee monitoring. Our first action was implementing a strict digital boundaries policy: no recording of home environments, mandatory virtual backgrounds, and employee control over when cameras are used. We also created an external audit system where employees can request all data the company has collected about them. Then came the breaking point. During our system overhaul, we discovered Martin's scheme went beyond selling screenshots. He had also implemented keylogging on company devices, tracking bathroom breaks through badge data, and monitoring employee tone and sentiment during meetings using voice analysis software. The company I thought respected our privacy had been harvesting every aspect of our work lives and personal spaces for profit. The violations were so comprehensive that the board considered dissolving the company entirely and selling off its assets. Instead, they opted for complete restructuring, new leadership, new policies, new security protocols, and significant compensation for affected employees. I'm now part of the executive team, focused exclusively on employee privacy and digital rights. The experience changed my entire perspective on remote work and digital privacy. Those convenient tools we rely on can easily become surveillance mechanisms in the wrong hands. Now, I advocate for privacy legislation beyond just our company, speaking at industry events about the potential for abuse in remote work technologies. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that privacy isn't just about hiding sensitive information. It's about having control over your personal boundaries and who crosses them. In a world where our homes have become our workplaces, those boundaries are more important than ever. Corporate privacy violations are disturbing, but personal betrayals cut deeper, especially when someone exploits your most vulnerable moments, like in this next story. I never expected my relationship to become content for thousands of strangers, but that's exactly what happened. My girlfriend Alison and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a friend's housewarming party, bonded over our shared love of true crime podcasts, and quickly became inseparable. She was smart, funny, creative, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She worked in social media marketing, which meant she was always on her phone, but I never thought much of it. That was just part of her job. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had disagreements like any couple, usually resolved them and moved on. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. Everything changed when I ran into an old college friend, Ryan, at a coffee shop. We were catching up when he suddenly gave me this awkward look. "Hey man, I hope things are better with you and Alison after that big fight about her sister's wedding." I froze. Alison and I had indeed argued about her sister's wedding 2 weeks earlier. She wanted me to take time off work for the destination ceremony, and I was concerned about using all my vacation days. It wasn't our finest moment, but it was a private disagreement that we'd eventually work through. "How do you know about that?" I asked. Ryan looked confused. "From Alison's Twitter, I follow Relationship Reality. That's her, right? I figured you knew since she's so popular." I had no idea what he was talking about. Alison had a personal Twitter account with maybe 200 followers, where she occasionally posted about work and food. I'd never heard of Relationship Reality. I mumbled something to Ryan about needing to go and immediately pulled up Twitter on my phone. The Relationship Reality account had over 100,000 followers. The bio read, chronicling the unfiltered reality of millennial relationships. No names, just truths. The profile picture was a stylized illustration of a couple, not recognizably us, but in retrospect clearly inspired by our features. I started scrolling through the feed, and my stomach dropped with each post. Day 782, he just said we should budget better before buying concert tickets, but had no problem dropping $100 on that special edition video game last week. Men are from Mars. Day 845, another Sunday morning where he's too tired for brunch with my friends, but magically has energy for 3 hours of basketball with the guys. Things they don't tell you before you move in together. Day 902, just found his ex's earring under the couch. He swears it's been there since before we met. Do I believe him? Stay tuned for the investigation. Trust issues. That last one was particularly upsetting because I remembered that incident clearly. The earring belonged to my sister, not an ex, and Alison had eventually accepted that after initially being suspicious. Online, however, she had spun it into a multi-day storyline about potential cheating, complete with polls asking her followers if they believed me. I scrolled back to the beginning of the account, nearly 3 years earlier, right when we started dating. Every disagreement, every miscommunication, every private moment had been documented, dissected, and dramatized for public consumption. Our entire relationship had been broadcast, albeit anonymously, to a massive audience that engaged enthusiastically with our most intimate moments. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I dug deeper, I discovered she had merchandise, mugs and t-shirts with quotes from our arguments. She had a Patreon where subscribers paid for exclusive relationship content and unfiltered fight analysis. There were sponsored posts where she recommended products during stories about our private life. She'd even started a weekly relationship advice podcast called Reality Check, where she used our experiences as case studies. She had monetized our relationship to the tune of what appeared to be thousands of dollars monthly, all while I remained completely unaware. That's when everything unraveled. I went home in a daze trying to process this betrayal. Our apartment suddenly felt like a stage set. How many moments that I thought were just between us had been performed for an audience? How many fights had been instigated or prolonged because they made for good content? I waited until Alison got home from work, trying to stay calm. When she walked in, I simply handed her my phone, with the Twitter account open. "What is this?" I asked. Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to defensiveness in seconds. No denial, no shame, just irritation at being caught. "It's anonymous," she said immediately. "I never use our real names." "That's your defense? That you didn't use our names while sharing every private moment of our relationship with 100,000 strangers?" "People relate to authentic relationship stories," she said, slipping into what I now recognized as her marketing voice. "I'm providing a service. Do you know how many women have told me my content helped them recognize toxic patterns in their own relationships?" The absolute gall to frame 3 years of privacy violations as some kind of public service. It's like a peeping Tom claiming they're just conducting neighborhood security assessments. Are our fights toxic? Am I toxic? Because that's how you portray me half the time. "I need to create narrative tension," she explained, as if that justified everything. "Sometimes I emphasize certain aspects for storytelling purposes. It's creative expression." "Creative expression?" I was struggling to maintain my composure. "You've been selling merchandise with my words on them. You have sponsors paying you to mention their products while discussing our sex life." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just content. Everyone shares their relationship online these days, not without their partner's knowledge or consent, not for profit." And here's where it gets absurd. She actually suggested I should be grateful for the exposure. "We could pivot to couples content," she offered, eyes lighting up with new marketing possibilities. "Now that you could join the podcast, people would love to hear your side. We could double the revenue stream." She didn't see our relationship as a partnership between two people who cared about each other. She saw it as content, as a product to be packaged and sold. I was just a character in her narrative, a resource to be mined for engagement. "Take it all down," I said quietly. "Delete the account, the merchandise, all of it." She laughed. "I can't do that. I have brand partnerships, subscription commitments. This is my career now." "Then we're done," I said with a clarity that surprised even me. "I won't be in a relationship where my privacy means nothing." I expected her to be upset, to fight for our relationship. Instead, she grabbed her phone and started typing. "What are you doing?" I asked. "This is going to make an amazing thread," she said, not even looking up. "The breakup arc has been building for weeks. My followers are going to freak out." I packed a bag and left that night. Within hours, the relationship reality account was documenting our breakup in real time, spinning a narrative where she was the sympathetic protagonist and I the controlling villain who couldn't support her creative expression. Her follower count jumped to 120K within days. I consulted a lawyer about my options. While I had a potential case for invasion of privacy and misappropriation of likeness, litigation would be expensive, time-consuming, and would ironically generate even more public exposure of my private life. Instead, I sent a formal cease and desist, demanding she stop sharing identifiable details about me and remove all past content that could be linked to my identity. Her response was to become slightly more careful about disguising details while continuing to mine our past relationship for content. She's now positioned herself as a breakup recovery expert with a new podcast and an upcoming book deal. The hardest part hasn't been the end of the relationship. In retrospect, it was doomed the moment she decided I was content rather than a partner. The hardest part has been the random strangers who recognize me from details in her posts, who think they know intimate things about me, who believe her carefully crafted narrative of who I am. I've become more guarded now, more careful about what I share and with whom. I've also become an advocate for digital consent laws that address this modern form of exploitation. Current privacy laws haven't caught up to the reality that our personal stories can be commodified and sold without our knowledge or permission. If there's any silver lining, it's that this experience has clarified what I value in relationships: mutual respect, genuine privacy, and the understanding that what happens between two people should stay between them unless both agree otherwise. These shouldn't be revolutionary concepts. But in an age where everything is potential content, maybe they are. Social media betrayal hurts, but imagine discovering someone you trusted was physically violating your personal space in the most calculated way. I moved to Seattle for a tech job last year and found a roommate through a mutual friend. Cassie seemed perfect. She'd lived in the city for years, knew all the best spots, and had a gorgeous apartment with reasonable rent in Capitol Hill. She worked in the nightlife industry, managing several clubs, which meant our schedules barely overlapped. She'd come home when I was leaving for work, and I'd be asleep by the time she got home. The arrangement felt ideal for two strangers sharing a space. About 3 months in, I started noticing odd things. I'd wake up to find items in our shared spaces rearranged, or occasionally hear whispers outside my bedroom door at odd hours. At first, I brushed it off as Cassie having friends over, or my imagination running wild in a new place. Then I began noticing strangers in our apartment giving me strange looks. Once, I came home early from work with a migraine and found a couple I didn't know sitting in our living room, drinking coffee. When I asked who they were, they awkwardly mumbled something about waiting for Cassie and quickly left. Another morning, I woke up to find a group of 3 people standing in our kitchen doorway, just watching me make breakfast. When I asked who they were, one of them said, "Oh, we're just here for the tour." Before I could question them further, Cassie suddenly appeared, ushered them out, and told me they were potential subletters for when her lease ended. It seemed odd. Our lease wasn't up for another 8 months, but I had to rush to work and didn't have time to press the issue. The final straw came when I woke up at 3 a.m. to find a stranger standing in my bedroom doorway, just staring at me. I screamed and they bolted. Cassie wasn't home, so I called the police, who took a report but didn't find anyone in the building. When Cassie returned, she suggested I might have been having a nightmare. "I know what I saw," I insisted. "Maybe you should get a lock for your door if you're feeling unsafe," she suggested, avoiding eye contact. That's when I decided to install a security camera in our common area. I didn't tell Cassie about it. I just needed to know if someone was entering our apartment when we weren't home. What I discovered was far more disturbing than I could have imagined. The footage showed Cassie bringing groups of people into our apartment at specific times, primarily when I was asleep or in the shower. She would quietly lead them through the space, pointing things out in hushed tones, occasionally opening my bedroom door just enough for them to peer inside. In one clip, she clearly gestured toward me sleeping before putting her finger to her lips, signaling them to stay quiet. That's when everything unraveled. I took a day off work to investigate while Cassie was sleeping. I searched her name along with terms like Seattle Tour and Authentic Experience, and there it was. Cassie had listings on multiple platforms offering what she called authentic Seattle living tours and real apartment voyeur experiences. Her description made my skin crawl. Experience how real Seattle locals live. This isn't your typical sterile Airbnb. This is a genuine lived-in apartment with a real local resident who has no idea you're there. Get an authentic glimpse into city living through this unique observational experience. See a tech worker in their natural habitat. Tours conducted with the utmost discretion. She charged $75 per person for a 30-minute observational tour of our apartment while I was sleeping, showering, or going about my daily routine. For an additional $50, tourists could sit in our living room for an hour, using our Wi-Fi and drinking our coffee for an immersive experience. The listing had dozens of reviews dating back months, with comments like, "So creepy but thrilling," and "Felt like we were in a human zoo, loved it." The absolute audacity to monetize your roommate's existence without their knowledge is truly breathtaking. It's like she decided roommate was actually spelled EXHIBIT and just ran with it. I downloaded all the evidence, including screenshots of the listings, reviews, and the security camera footage. Then I waited for Cassie to wake up. When she emerged from her room around noon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open to her Authentic Living Experience page. "What the hell is this?" I asked. Her reaction wasn't shock or shame. It was annoyance at being caught. "It's just a side business," she said with a shrug. "I don't see what the big deal is." "The big deal, you've been charging people to watch me sleep. You've been bringing strangers into our home to observe me like I'm an animal in a zoo. And here's where it gets absurd. She actually tried to frame this as a positive contribution to society. People want authentic experiences, not tourist traps, she explained as if conducting creepy sleep-watching tours was some noble service. The experience economy is the future. I'm just meeting a market demand. By violating my privacy and safety? Oh, please, she scoffed. Privacy is an outdated concept. We're all performing for each other all the time anyway. I'm just monetizing what's already happening naturally. She continued with a straight face. Besides, I'm helping tourists get a genuine understanding of Seattle culture. It's basically educational. The mental gymnastics required to frame charging people to watch your non-consenting roommate sleep as some kind of cultural education program deserves an Olympic medal. Like sure, and breaking into someone's house is just an unscheduled architectural tour. "Did it ever occur to you that I might not want strangers watching me sleep or shower?" I asked. "That's why I didn't tell you," she replied, as if that explained everything. "What you don't know can't hurt you." Then came the breaking point. "Look," she said, seeing my disgust, "we could turn this into a good thing for both of us. I'll split the profits with you, 60-40. All you have to do is keep living your life. Maybe add a few quirky habits for the tourists to observe. People love that authentic stuff." That was it. I packed a bag, went to a hotel and called the police from there. I filed reports with them, our property management company, and all the platforms where she'd listed her experiences. I provided the evidence I'd collected and explained the situation. The response was swift. The platforms removed her listings and banned her accounts. Our property management company issued an immediate eviction notice, citing multiple lease violations. The police investigation led to charges of voyeurism, trespassing facilitation, and invasion of privacy. Cassie's defense was that she wasn't technically breaking any specific laws, since she was a legal tenant, bringing guests into a space she paid for. Her lawyer attempted to frame it as a gray area in rental and privacy laws. Fortunately, the judge disagreed, particularly given the commercial nature of the violations and the fact that she was profiting from invading my privacy. I've since moved to a new apartment where I live alone, despite the higher cost. I've installed additional security and have cameras in all common areas. The experience has made me hyper-vigilant about my privacy and personal space. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. The way Cassie discouraged me from working from home, how she always seemed to know my schedule better than I did. The jokes she made about how predictable my routines were. She had been studying me as a product to sell from the very beginning. I'm now working with a victim advocacy group to address this unique form of privacy violation. We're pushing for clearer laws regarding experience economy, exploitation, and stronger protections for shared living spaces. The case has gotten some media attention, revealing that similar authentic living tours have been operating in tourist-heavy cities across the country. As for Cassie, she's facing trial next month. In a bizarre twist, she's attempted to leverage her notoriety by starting a podcast about disruptive hospitality concepts. Though recording from her parents' basement probably wasn't part of her original business plan. Some violations happen right in your own home, but others involve discovering someone you once loved is stalking their next victim, just like this chilling story. I always thought I was done with Jake when we broke up, but life had other plans. It started 3 months after our split, when a package arrived at my door with his name on it. We'd dated for nearly 2 years, and even though I'd changed my address after moving out, occasional mail still found its way to me. Usually, I'd just write "no longer at this address" and stick it back in the mailbox. But this package was different. For one thing, it was heavy. For another, it came from a company called Secure Tech Solutions, with a customs declaration labeling it as home security equipment. Jake had never mentioned any interest in home security during our relationship. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were 5 devices that looked like ordinary household items: a smoke detector, an alarm clock, a phone charger, a picture frame, and an air freshener. But each had been modified to contain tiny, sophisticated cameras with wireless transmission capabilities. These weren't cheap spy gadgets from a novelty shop. These were professional-grade surveillance devices designed specifically for covert recording. My blood ran cold. Jake and I had ended things because he'd become increasingly controlling and jealous. He'd constantly question where I'd been, who I'd talked to, accused me of hiding things. I'd attributed it to insecurity and trust issues. Now I wondered if there was something far more sinister at play. I knew he had started dating someone new, a woman named Megan he'd met at his gym. We had mutual friends who'd mentioned it, though I hadn't paid much attention. But now I couldn't stop thinking about her. Was he planning to install these in her home? After debating what to do, I found Megan on social media and sent her a message explaining who I was and asking to meet. She agreed, though she seemed understandably suspicious. We met at a coffee shop the next day. I'm not here to cause drama, I assured her, but I received a package meant for Jake that has me concerned for your safety. I showed her photos of the devices and explained what they were. Her initial skepticism quickly turned to horror. He installed a new smoke detector last week, she said quietly, and brought me an alarm clock because mine was outdated. That's when everything unraveled. We went to her apartment together, and using a signal detector app I'd downloaded, we found not just the smoke detector and alarm clock, but 3 other hidden cameras in her bathroom vent, bedroom TV, and living room bookshelf. All were live and transmitting data. How could I have been so stupid? She kept saying as we carefully removed each device. You weren't stupid, I told her. These are designed to fool people. That's the whole point. But the discovery at Megan's apartment raised a terrifying question. Had Jake done this to me too? I went back to my old apartment, which fortunately hadn't been rented out yet. The property manager let me in after I explained I was concerned about having left personal documents behind. Using the same detector app, I found 7 hidden cameras throughout the space, all installed in places that would have captured my most private moments. Some had been disguised as everyday objects, others hidden in vents or light fixtures. Based on the dust patterns, they had been there for months, possibly the entire time we'd lived together. The realization that my most intimate moments had been secretly recorded made me physically ill. I spent the next hour throwing up in what had once been my bathroom, overwhelmed by the violation. Megan and I went to the police together that same day. The officers took our statements and the devices as evidence. They seemed genuinely disturbed by the sophistication of the equipment and immediately started the process for search warrants for Jake's property and electronic devices. But that wasn't even the worst part. When police searched Jake's home, they found an elaborate computer setup with terabytes of stored video footage organized into folders with women's names. 12 in total, including both me and Megan. Some of the folders contained footage dating back over 8 years. He had been doing this to every woman he'd been in a relationship with since college. The footage wasn't just sitting in an archive either. Jake had been editing certain videos and uploading them to private online forums where members traded intimate recordings. He'd built a reputation in these communities, even creating compilation videos with commentary. The level of calculation and exploitation was staggering. The mental gymnastics required to justify systematically violating multiple women's privacy over nearly a decade is truly breathtaking. Imagine the cognitive dissonance necessary to maintain everyday relationships with people you're secretly filming like lab specimens, having conversations about trust and intimacy while literally cataloging their most private moments without consent. That's not just crossing boundaries. It's pretending boundaries don't exist while meticulously documenting exactly where they should be. When police arrested Jake, they found a notebook containing detailed plans for his surveillance activities, including notes on each woman's habits and schedules. My name had been crossed out with relocating, find new address, written beside it. Megan's name had annotations about blind spots in her apartment he still needed to cover. The case against him was overwhelming. Beyond the physical evidence, police found payment records, online communications, and the original order confirmations for all the equipment. Jake eventually accepted a plea deal rather than face a trial, receiving a 10-year sentence with no possibility of parole for 5 years, plus registration as a sex offender. But the legal consequences didn't erase the trauma. I started having panic attacks, constantly checking for cameras in my new apartment. I couldn't change clothes without inspecting every corner of the room first. Showers became quick, anxious affairs. I felt exposed and violated in ways that are hard to articulate to someone who hasn't experienced it. Then came the breaking point. During victim impact statements at Jake's sentencing hearing, I learned that one of his earlier victims had reported him for suspicious behavior years ago, but without concrete evidence, the case hadn't been pursued. If she had been believed, if there had been better laws around intimate partner surveillance, if there had been more awareness about these types of violations, maybe the rest of us would have been spared. That's when I decided to transform my trauma into action. Working with two other victims from Jake's case, I founded SEEN, Surveillance and Electronic Exploitation Network. We provide support for victims of intimate partner surveillance, connect them with tech experts who can detect and remove hidden devices, and advocate for stronger laws against these violations. It's been 3 years since the package arrived at my door. Our organization has now helped over 200 people discover and remove hidden surveillance from their homes. We've trained law enforcement in multiple states on how to investigate these cases and worked with legislators to strengthen penalties for intimate partner surveillance. The most powerful part of this work is watching survivors reclaim their sense of privacy and safety. There's something profound about the moment when someone who has been secretly watched for months or years finally sweeps their home clean of devices and sleeps peacefully for the first time. As for me, I still have moments of paranoia. I still check new smoke detectors and alarm clocks. I probably always will, but I've reclaimed most of my life from the shadow of that violation. And every time we help another person do the same, Jake's power diminishes a little more. And that brings us to the end of today's stories of betrayal and deception. But before I go, sweet dreams, everyone, and remember that while these stories may seem shocking, they remind us to stay vigilant and trust our instincts when something feels off. The world can be a strange place, but awareness is our best protection. If you enjoyed these tales from the depths of Reddit, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me which story you found most disturbing. I'll be back next week with more incredible true stories that will make you question everything and everyone around you.